Picture a river 60 miles wide. Not long, wide. Over 100 miles from top to bottom, shallow enough in places that you could wade across it, and dropping so little elevation along the way that the whole system loses about 2 inches of height for every mile it travels. Here's the part that's hard to picture. That water is moving. Right now, as you watch this, it's sliding south across the state at roughly half a mile a day. Half a mile a day. You could out-crawl it. Stand at the edge and you'd swear it's standing still. Because at that speed, standing still and flowing are the same thing to the human eye. Everybody calls this place a swamp. The signs say swamp. The postcards say swamp. That word is wrong, and it's not a small mistake. A woman named Marjory Stoneman Douglas figured out exactly how wrong it was back in 1947, and she spent decades trying to make everyone else see what she saw. By the time we're done, this place stops looking like a wetland and starts looking like a machine. One built by Geology, broken by engineers on purpose, and now being rebuilt by the same kind of engineers on purpose again. Fact 1. Hydrologists have a term for what this water is doing, and it's called sheet flow. That means the water isn't confined to a channel with banks on either side, the way the Mississippi or the Hudson works. It's moving as one continuous shallow mass across open land, spread edge to edge, with no walls telling it where to go. Fact 2. Here's why the word river isn't just a poetic stretch. By the actual definition hydrologists use, a river is a body of water flowing in a defined direction over a bed, wide and shallow instead of narrow and deep. But flowing water is flowing water. The definition doesn't require banks. It requires direction and movement, and this has both. Fact 3. Over that entire 100-mile run, the water drops somewhere around 12 to 14 feet total. Picture a one-story building. Lay it on its side and stretch it out over 100 miles, and that's the entire vertical drop this river works with. A parking lot slopes more than that in 50 feet. This is about as close to flat as moving water gets anywhere on Earth. Fact 4. So where does all this water actually start? Up near Orlando, in a string of lakes called the Kissimmee chain. Rain falls, fills those lakes, and they feed south into the biggest lake in the system, Lake Okeechobee, which acts like a holding tank for everything the chain collects. Fact 5. From there, the water spills out the south end of Okeechobee, spreads across the limestone shelf we'll get into shortly, and eventually reaches Florida Bay at the very bottom of the state. Start to finish, lake chain to saltwater, that's the entire path. One system, one direction, closing a loop that most people never realize exists under their feet. Fact 6. Now here's where the word swamp actually falls apart, on 2 separate counts. A swamp, by definition, is a wetland dominated by trees. Cypress swamps, mangrove swamps, that's the category. What covers most of this landscape isn't trees, it's a marsh, dominated by grass-like plants standing in open water. Wrong vegetation for the word, and swamps, by definition, hold stagnant water. Water that sits and doesn't go anywhere. This water is moving south every single day at that half-mile pace. Wrong hydrology too. 2 independent reasons, and both of them wrong. Fact 7. And the plant that gives this place its nickname isn't even grass. Sawgrass is a sedge, a completely different family of plant, with a triangular stem instead of a round one, and blades that saw into your skin if you brush against them wrong. It looks like grass from a distance. It is not grass. So the nickname is wrong twice over, once on the word swamp, and once on the word grass. Fact 8. That woman from the open, Marjory Stoneman Douglas, is the reason anyone calls this a river of grass at all. She published a book with that exact title in 1947, and it reframed the entire argument overnight, not as a worthless wetland waiting to be drained, but as a river that happened to be covered in sedge instead of water you could see. She spent the rest of her life fighting to protect what she'd renamed, and she kept fighting into her hundreds, living to 108 years old. Fact 9. One more number before we go underground. The Everglades you can visit today is roughly half the size it used to be. The historical system covered close to twice the area it does now. Everything that follows, the draining, the farming, the roads, happened to a river that was already cut down to half its original self before most of the damage even started. Fact 10. Everything you just heard about slow water and gentle slopes only works because of what is sitting underneath it. The whole system rests on limestone, and that limestone is not solid rock the way you picture a mountain. It is full of holes. Rainwater has been eating through it for thousands of years, dissolving tiny channels and pockets into the stone, so the rock underneath the Everglades acts less like a floor and more like a stiff, waterlogged sponge. Fact 11. What matters even more than the holes is how level that limestone shelf actually sits. Most bedrock tilts, buckles, humps up into hills somewhere. This shelf barely does any of that over its entire run south. And that flatness is not a side detail. It is the whole reason sheet flow is possible in the first place. Water finds the lowest point and moves toward it. Give water a perfectly flat floor, 100 miles long, and instead of carving one channel, it just spreads out and covers everything at once. Fact 12. To get a feel for how flat we are actually talking, think about a card table. Now imagine tilting one edge up by less than the thickness of a phone book and asking a puddle of water on that table to still know which way is downhill. That's the scale of incline deciding the fate of an entire ecosystem. A few inches, repeated over miles, is the difference between marsh and dry ground. Fact 13. Those few inches are exactly what create the tree islands scattered across the marsh, places locals call hammocks. It does not take much. A rise of a foot or two above the surrounding water, sometimes even less, is enough for solid ground to form and hold. Below that line, you get sawgrass standing in water. Above it, by just that little, you get actual dry land with actual trees. Fact 14. And once dry land exists, even a small patch of it, life piles onto it fast. Deer bed down there. Birds nest in the branches instead of building at water level. Predators follow the deer. A few inches of elevation becomes the real estate that decides where almost everything in this system is allowed to live. Keep that in mind because one specific animal later in this video depends on these islands more than any other. Fact 15. Down at water level, something else has been building for centuries. Sawgrass dies back, falls into standing water, and instead of rotting away the normal way, it partly resists breaking down because there is not enough oxygen down in that water to finish the job. Layer after layer piles up over hundreds of years, compressing into a dense, spongy soil called peat, sometimes just called muck. That soil is basically stored plant matter, centuries of it, sitting wet and dense under the marsh. Hold on to that too. Fact 16. All of this, the flow, the islands, the peat, runs on a rhythm, 2 seasons trading off every year. During the wet months, the marsh fills, sheet flow strengthens, and water covers ground that had been bare dirt weeks earlier. During the dry months, big stretches shrink down to isolated pools, and animals that had the whole marsh to spread across suddenly crowd into whatever water is left. That back and forth is not a minor detail of the climate. It is closer to a heartbeat, the one thing that has been driving every other process in this system for longer than anyone's been counting. The landscape is not one fixed place. It is two different landscapes, trading off every year on schedule. This whole system runs on that schedule, wet and dry, flood and shrink, on a rhythm that has been repeating for thousands of years. What happened next is what happened when people looked at that schedule and decided to break it on purpose. Fact 17. Start with the sales pitch. In the early 20th century, land companies carved this marsh into lots and sold it as farmland, sight unseen, to buyers up north who never once set foot on the property. Glossy brochures showed neat rows of citrus and vegetables growing on soil that, in reality, sat under a foot of moving water for half the year. Some of those buyers never found out what they'd actually purchased until the deed showed up. Fact 18. That wasn't just opportunistic real estate. It was policy. Florida's own state government made draining the Everglades an official goal, stated in plain language, not a side effect of some other project. The marsh was treated as wasted land, and the plan was to empty it out entirely and turn the whole basin into farmland and towns. Fact 19. Then in 1928, the lake decided the timeline. A hurricane pushed Lake Okeechobee over its southern rim, and the water didn't just flood, it drowned entire communities with almost no warning. The death toll ran into the thousands, and to this day nobody has an exact count, because so many of the victims were migrant farm workers whose deaths were never fully logged. That single storm turned this drainage effort from a slow land grab into an emergency. Fact 20. The response was the Herbert Hoover Dike, a wall of earth and rock built to physically encircle Lake Okeechobee and keep it from ever doing that again. The lake that used to spill freely into the marsh south of it now sat behind a barrier, penned in on command. Fact 21. Once the dike went up, the rest of the plumbing followed at a scale that's hard to picture. The Federal Flood Control Project, launched in 1948 alone, is commonly cited at roughly 1,400 miles of canals and levees, laced with pump stations built to move water wherever engineers decided it should go. 1,400 miles gets you from Miami to Chicago, except this entire network sat inside one state, built to control a single river. Fact 22. Before any of that touched it, the Kissimmee River north of Okeechobee wound through its floodplain the way rivers do naturally, curling into wide bends, backing up into wetlands, taking its time getting anywhere. Fact 23. Engineers replaced that winding river with a straight ditch, cut for speed instead of flow. Water that used to loop and linger now shot south in a fraction of the time, which was exactly the point. Get the water off the land fast. Hold on to this one, because undoing it becomes one of the strangest projects in the whole story. Fact 24. Around the same time, a road called the Tamiami Trail went in, cutting a straight line across the state to connect Tampa and Miami. It ran directly across the marsh's natural flow path, laid down with the same logic as the canals, straight beats curved every time. Fact 25. Nobody set out to build a dam, but that's what the road became. Water moving south hit the raised roadbed and had nowhere to go, so it pooled up against the north side while the marsh on the south side ran drier than it should have. A road meant to connect two cities ended up deciding how much water an entire ecosystem received. Fact 26. South of the lake, the drained marsh became the Everglades Agricultural Area. Hundreds of thousands of acres turned into some of the most productive farmland in the country, most of it growing sugarcane on soil that used to sit permanently wet. Fact 27. None of that farmland works without the pumps running. The moment the drainage system stops actively pushing water out, the fields underneath it start reverting to what they were before anyone touched them. The entire agricultural economy south of Okeechobee depends on a system that has to keep running year-round, forever, just to keep the ground dry enough to farm. Fact 28. Here's a break from the concrete and the canals. Somewhere in the marsh, south of all this engineering, American alligators and American crocodiles share the same territory, and this is the only place on Earth where that happens. Alligators tolerate fresh water, crocodiles need salt or brackish water, and the Everglades blends both close enough together that neither one has to choose. Nowhere else on the planet do their ranges overlap like this. The engineering worked exactly the way it was designed to. Every pump, every canal, every straightened river did precisely what the blueprints called for. That success is what caused everything in the next part of this story. If you want the rest of how Florida actually works, the parts under the postcards, subscribe to Florida Empire before we get into what all that plumbing broke. Fact 29. Picture thousands of waiting birds lifting off a single stand of trees at once, wings cracking the air like a rolling round of applause. That's what a rookery looked like here before anyone touched the plumbing, and in the right pocket of the marsh. It still happens today, just smaller than it used to be. 30. Before drainage started, naturalists counted waiting bird colonies in this system that ran into the hundreds of thousands, nesting across South Florida in a single season. That was the baseline. That was normal. Fact 31. Today's counts run a fraction of that, a steep decline from those historic highs. This isn't a story about birds getting careless or predators getting lucky. It's a system responding to a schedule that no longer matches the one their nesting behavior evolved around. Change when the water shows up and how deep it sits, and the birds that time their breeding to that water either adjust or they don't nest at all. Fact 32. Underneath all of that is the same peat we talked about earlier, and drainage changed what happens to it. Peat forms wet, packed down without much oxygen reaching it. Drain the water off, expose that soil to open air and the microbes that couldn't break it down before suddenly can. The ground starts eating itself, one microbial bite at a time, and centuries of stored plant matter start disappearing into thin air, literally as carbon dioxide. Fact 33. There's a fence post near Belle Glade that tells this story better than any chart could. Engineers drove it down to bedrock back in the 1920s, flush with the soil surface at the time. That same post now stands several feet clear of the ground around it. Not because anyone pulled it up, but because the ground it was planted in has dropped away beneath it, inch by inch, decade after decade. Fact 34. That drying peat doesn't just vanish quietly, it burns. Once the moisture is gone, peat fires can ignite from a lightning strike or a stray spark, and then burn underground for weeks, sometimes months, smoldering through soil instead of across it, because the fuel isn't the grass on top, it's the compressed plant matter sitting below. The same material that took centuries to build the marsh can turn around and consume itself from the inside once it's dry enough to catch. Fact 35. Less water flowing south means less pressure pushing back against the ocean underground, and Florida's coast runs on that pressure balance. As freshwater flow drops, saltwater doesn't wait politely. It moves inland through the same porous limestone that lets water move everywhere else in this system, trading places with the fresh water that used to hold it back. Fact 36. That swap matters for two reasons at once. Coastal well fields that supply drinking water to millions of people sit in the path of that advancing salt water, and the marsh itself needs fresh water to stay marsh. Push salt water far enough inland and you don't just risk the tap, you risk the plants and animals that never evolved to handle brackish conditions in the first place. Fact 37. Now here's the thing that's still working exactly the way it evolved to. American alligators dig depressions into the marsh floor, and those holes, scattered across the dry season landscape, are what keep the whole system from shutting down. When the marsh shrinks to isolated pools, the gator holes hold water longer than anything else around them. Fish, turtles, frogs, crayfish crowd into them, and the wading birds follow those concentrations straight to the gator's front yard. The alligator is an apex predator, but the more important thing it does is engineer the drought survival infrastructure for everything else in the marsh. One animal digging a hole, and the whole food web gets a second chance. One system, one broken schedule, cascading through birds, soil, water, and the animals that engineered their own sanctuary out of it. And through every bit of that disruption, animals kept living here anyway, some barely hanging on, some turning the whole mess into an opportunity nobody engineered for. Fact 38. Somewhere in that shrinking, salting, subsiding marsh, the Florida panther is trying to hang on, and there aren't many left to do the hanging. Estimates put the population at fewer than 250 adults across the entire state, which means an animal built to prowl a continent has been squeezed down to a number you could fit in a high school gym. Remember those tree islands and hammocks from earlier? The few extra inches of dry ground that decide who gets to live where. Panthers need exactly that. They den on high ground, hunt from it, raise young on it, and as those islands get scarcer and more fragmented by roads and canals, the cats have less and less real estate to work with. Fact 39. That marsh is also the largest designated wilderness east of the Mississippi, holding 3 international conservation labels at once, but that status did not protect it from what came next. Fact 40. Now for the animal nobody engineered on purpose. Burmese pythons. Showing up in the Everglades trace back to the exotic pet trade. Snakes bought small and cute that grew into something an apartment could not hold. Released into the marsh by owners who ran out of options. Plus animals that escaped captivity outright, including stock likely scattered when Hurricane Andrew tore through breeding facilities in 1992. Whatever the exact mix of releases and escapes, the marsh gave them exactly what they needed: warm water, dense cover, and prey that had never once evolved a defense against a snake this size. Fact 41. Nobody knows precisely how many pythons are out there now, and that uncertainty is itself the point. Estimates range widely from tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands across South Florida, and researchers who track them for a living still say most of the population is never seen at all. A snake that can stretch past 15 feet, camouflaged in sawgrass and shadow, can lie within a few yards of a survey team and simply not be found. They are not rare. They are just better at not being counted than almost anything else in the marsh. Fact 42. The clearest evidence of what that means shows up in the numbers for everything pythons eat. Surveys across the python's core range have documented raccoon and opossum sightings falling off hard, with some studies showing declines of 90% or more in python-occupied areas, and bobcat and rabbit numbers falling hard as well. That is not a rounding error. That is most of a mammal community disappearing from a landscape in the span of a couple of decades. Nobody released these snakes to run an experiment on the Everglades food web. But that is exactly what happened anyway, one escaped pet at a time, until an entire layer of the ecosystem quietly rewrote itself. Humans did not plan any of that, but they caused it, the same way they caused the drained peat and the silenced rookeries. And now, the same species responsible for breaking this marsh's schedule in the first place has spent the last several decades trying to put it back together, on purpose this time, with blueprints instead of accidents. Fact 43. That rebuilding effort has a name: the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, or CERP, and its scale puts it in a category by itself. Nothing else in the country comes close. Dozens of separate construction projects, spread across decades, all aimed at one river. Fact 44. The goal isn't just to move water south, it's to restore the timing, sending it at the volume and pace the marsh actually needs, instead of wherever the nearest canal happens to point. Fact 45. Start with the Kissimmee. The river engineers straightened into a ditch back in the flood control era. Crews went back in, filled sections of that channel back in by hand, and rebuilt the bends they had erased decades earlier. Miles of the river got their curves back, with major work finishing in the 2020s. An agency spent public money undoing what an earlier agency spent public money building. Fact 46. The payoff showed up fast. Wading birds and fish came back to stretches of the Kissimmee that had sat as a straight, lifeless ditch for 50 years. In some years, wading bird counts more than doubled the restoration targets the engineers had set. Give a river its bends back, and the life that depends on those bends comes looking for them almost immediately. Fact 47. The Tamiami Trail got the same treatment. The first fix was a single-mile-long bridge, raising the roadbed just enough to let water pass underneath instead of stacking up against it. Engineers watched that bridge work, then built a second, larger span, bringing the total elevated stretch past 2 miles. Sheet flow that had been dammed against that road for the better part of a century started moving south again, underneath the same highway that used to block it. Fact 48. South of Okeechobee, a new reservoir is going in, built to hold stormwater and clean it before sending it south into the marsh, instead of dumping it east and west into the coastal estuaries, the way the old system did. Between that reservoir, the bridges, and the Kissimmee work, the price tag runs into the tens of billions of dollars, spread across a project timeline that stretches decades into the future and is nowhere near finished. The map of this system today does not match the map that's coming. Whether that future map looks more like 1900 or more like right now is still being decided, one construction contract at a time. That water entering Okeechobee right now, tonight, is still on its way to Florida Bay. Inches deep, 60 miles wide. Moving at the same crawl it always has, no faster than the day the first surveyor called it worthless. Everything in between, the draining, the collapse, the pythons, the bridges, happened to a river most people still walk past and call a swamp. Most of them never do. Stood out there yourself? Tell me if it ever looked like a river to you. Subscribe to Florida Empire for more of the engineering hiding under Florida's postcard version.